Good morning everyone and welcome to the fantastic Hayfield Lakes. Now I'm sat on Danny's Island Lake today on peg 22, great area of the lake, to run through some match winning techniques that may come of use to you if you're lucky enough to have brought a ticket for the In the Mix match, Dynamite Baits In the Mix match on the 29th of June. So I just want to run through a few of my key tips on how to catch fish on a variety of methods. Right, first approach, and one of the most important approaches is the short pole. As we all know, Hayfield is a very deep venue. The short pole marries perfectly with deep venues where you can just get into that sensible depth of water. 6.5 foot I'm fishing in at 6 meters out. A little bit further out, it's a bit too deep for anything like that really, fishing on the deck, and this is why the short pole's so good. This is an area that no matter what else you're doing, you can keep in control by feeding it and keep in touch with that particular line, whether it works straight away or later on in the match. On venues like this, it will work, especially on days like today. Overcast wet days or windy days like what we're faced with today are absolutely perfect for catching big weights of carp on the short pole. Now, at Hayfield, there's loads of big carp, so it's a kind of no-nonsense rig. I've got a 4B18 Malman Speedy, 018 main line to an 016 hook length. And down at the bottom here, I've got Shimano Aspire line going all the way down, and I've got number 9 spread. Nice big heavy shot, so it helps me determine the difference between a line bite and a proper indication. And it also keeps my bait static on the bottom and looks naturally presentable to the fish. As I said, 016 hook length to a 14 hook with a 6mm pellet. Nice big hook, nice robust setup, so you're going to land everything that you hook. As well as that, you could be in a situation where the last 10 minutes it might work. You don't want to mess about with the fish, you want to get them in, get back out and make the most of that feeding window when they're in your peg feeding on the bait. On the end as well, I've just got a little pot. Sometimes throwing works, sometimes potting works. Today, potting has definitely worked, simply because it's a nice bright sunny day. And if I'm constantly feeding pellets by hand, making noise, it's bringing fish off the bottom. By potting in, it makes less noise. It's forcing them to follow the bait down and actually feed off the bottom, which deters false indications and line bites. So you've got two feeding principles that are very effective. My honest opinion, 6mm pellets are the best for this particular depth and approach. You can feed 8mm, but I personally prefer to feed 6mm. Just a standard fishery 6mm on a band works absolutely perfect. So that's it, a nice simple approach, an approach that you've always got to keep alive and keep it going, because you never know when it's going to actually work. Right, let's talk about the bomb and pellet. As we all know, when it comes to pellet waggler, bomb and pellet fishing, it's so effective, especially on venues like this. And a lot of it's dictated by the weather, so you have to use what we call watercraft sometimes to understand what is the best approach. Today, without a doubt, the bomb and pellet has been far more effective than the waggler, simply because it's still early on in the day. Later on in the day, when we've been feeding the peg for a bit of time, getting the fish competing higher up in the water, that's when the waggler plays its part. But as you can see, it's a really windy day, and on days like today, that's where the fish are more happy following your bait down and feeding off the bottom, coming back up to the depth where they want to be and digesting the food. So you constantly have to feed your peg to give them a reason to follow your bait down. My setup is really simple for the bomb and pellet. I've got a Shimano 10-foot feeder rod, 022 line to a 1/2 ounce bomb. Not a bomb too heavy really. I want kind of like a reasonably light bomb. It's in line, quick change bead at the end, but a reasonably light bomb that kind of like gives the fish the opportunity to actually see the bomb and the pellet falling through the water. And it also makes a lovely noise on the surface, which mimics the sound of a pellet hitting the surface as well. 12-inch hook length, 018 Aspire line to a 14 hook, and just a simple 8mm pellet. I'm a big believer, if I'm feeding 8mm pellets, that's what I want to put on the band. That's what the fish are feeding on. that's what I want to catch on. However, there are times where your little twists when it comes to hook baits really do make a difference. And I've caught quite a lot of fish using the F1 Sweet, feeding the fishery pellets, the 8mm here, but actually putting an F1 Sweet pellet on the hook as a contrast bait. And that often works, especially at Hayfield where the water's reasonably clear. That works an absolute treat. Just something different, and I think a lot of it is confidence. If you're confident that it's going to make a difference, sometimes that's what happens. So always be armed with a few little hook bait choices just to try if you're struggling. But generally, standard pellet on the band will work absolutely perfectly. A nice setup, quite a light quiver tip as well, which allows me to tighten up to the bomb as well. And because it's an inline setup, the fish are actually hooking themselves against the bomb itself. It's still free running, as you can see, but it acts as like what we call a semi-bolt rig. And once the fish picks the bait off the bottom, it comes off, it lifts the bomb off, and that's what sets the hook initially, and that's what gives you your bite. So a really nice, simple approach. The feeding behind it is the most important. It's not a case of constantly feeding bits of bait. It's about 3 pouchfuls, making lots of noise, giving the fish too much choice to grab the bait on the descent. That means they're forced to follow the bait down onto the bottom, and in turn, you'll catch them quicker, and there's a better actually chance of them taking your hook bait at the same time. Feed too little, and you're going to bring them up, higher up in the water. The same principle with the pellet waggler, that you're actually trying to catch them on the bottom. So feed large amounts, maybe 2 or 3 pouches, and then don't feed. And that gives them a reason to look around and actually follow that bait down to the bottom. If there's constantly bait going in, there's no reason for them to follow that bait down. Pellet wagglers, we all know, is absolutely devastating and can be unbeatable nearly all through the summertime months, especially at Hayfield, simply because it's a deep water. The fish like to back away from the pole tips because if it's a deep water, generally the water's clearer. So the fish want to feed shallower, but a further distance away from your pole tip often. Today it's quite a windy day, and as I've already said, the bomb works really well today, but we've also had a few fish on the waggler later on. So let me just explain to you the setup that I'm using. I'm using a Shimano 11-foot waggler rod, 020 main line, a reasonably light line. It's a Technium Invisitech main line that's a kind of like a neutrally buoyant line that allows me to pick the line up quickly and connect with the fish. I've got a Keith Easton waggler, 0.6 on there, as you can see, with, let's say, 4 foot of line from the float to the hook. That's really important. It's not about I want to fish 4 foot deep, it's allowing 2 noises to hit the surface. You've got the waggler hitting the surface, and then you've got the noise of the pellet hitting the surface away from the waggler, creating a lovely little plop, ensuring that your line is straight on the surface on the cast. So if a fish does decide to take your hook bait instantly, your float registers that indication, and that's when you strike. So although I'm fishing a 4 foot length, I'm actually going with the intentions to get a bite within 10 seconds. As a golden rule with the pellet waggler, it's a very busy way of catching fish. And if you're leaving your waggler in stationary, it's defeating the whole object of what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to get them fish competing just under the surface for the bait that you're entering into the water. So how I feed my peg is, I will constantly feed my peg, wait a few seconds, and then cast over the top. And the reason behind that is so the fish are coming to the noise of the pellets, they're intercepting the majority of the pellets they can actually visibly see, and then they're hanging around waiting for some more to enter the surface. That's when your pellet waggler hits the surface and they grab your hook bait, because there's less choice for the fish to feed on. If you chuck out a lot of the time, let's say for example did it the opposite way around, where you chuck your waggler out, you fed over the top, you've got less chance of the fish finding your hook bait because there's too much choice for the fish. So always bear that in mind with a pellet waggler. Feed first, whether it's 1 pouch, 2 pouch, or on a hard day 5 or 6 pellets, and then cast over the top to help them see your hook bait quicker. So a very, very simple setup, 020 main line, 018 hook length, big hook. I've got a 14 on, just a standard banded 8mm pellet what I'm feeding, and there you have it. And it's a case of just keep feeding it. And the beauty about it is you're fishing it over the same line as your bomb and pellet. So if the waggler doesn't work, pick your bomb and pellet up now and again and just have a go and see if they're actually a bit deeper and following your bait down onto the bottom. Right, let's talk about another very popular way of catching fish on commercials, but especially here at Hayfield Lakes, the method feeder. You've got, obviously, we're on Danny's Island, you've got the island pegs that produce regularly with the method feeder, and that's why we're sat on this particular peg, to cover all aspects of match-winning ways on Hayfield Lakes. So, because it's quite a chuck here where I am, I'm on peg 22, I think it's just under 70 metres to the island. I'm using an 11-foot rod. So I've got 026 main line down to a hybrid feeder, 36 gram hybrid feeder. It was just about the right weight for chucking across. If it was a bit windy, I'd put just a same size feeder, but one with some extra lead on the base, just to add some extra lead for aiding the accuracy in the casting and preventing that feeder from moving down the shelf. The method feeder, as we all know, is so effective, and especially here on the island pegs where you can get into that shallow water with a feeder on days like today where the long pole is unpresentable because of the wind and the waggler's a bit more difficult. You're relying upon more static ways of catching fish, which is bomb and pellet over your waggler line and the method feeder, which could play a massive part in the big match coming up. So let me just run through my process. I've got a 4-inch hook length, 018, a 14 hook again, nice big hook. There's a lot of big carp in here, I don't want to mess about. If I get a bite from a big carp, it could be a match winning fish, I want it to count. So 14 hook, Matrix Carp Rigger 14 to a 7mm Speedy Washter. And all I'm doing is I'm bunging the feeder full of fishery 2mm pellets that I've dyed betaine green as well, as I always do on a lot of venues. Dye my pellets green, it helps my hook bait stand out a little bit more. And that's it. And all it's a case of with the method feeder is building the peg up. A lot of the time, you're not going to catch straight away. You have to build your peg up like a lot of approaches and keep working at it. In theory, if you think about it, that far bank is my other margin line. So I've got to keep that bait going in to give the fish a reason to settle in that shallow water and feed confidently. So keep working at it. But that is one of the most effective ways of catching fish, especially on these particular pegs on Danny's Lake. Margin heaven. Now, let's talk about one of the most effective ways of catching fish. Later on in the match, maybe the last hour, it's crucial that you make the most of the margins, or especially if you've got a bit of space. This big match, there may be a few pegs that could really walk away with the match where there's a bit of space, then fish are going to come down the edge a little bit earlier. Make the most of that situation, because they're always bigger stamp fish down the margins. They're not stupid. They come down at a time when they know that the anglers are putting bait in the edges, when they're packing up, and that's their feeding time. That's the feeding window for margin fish. So be positive when you're margin fishing. So let me just talk about the setup that I'm using. I'm using Elite Hollow 18 to 20, really nice robust elastic, handles big fish with ease and lands them a lot quicker, which is really important. If I may only have 15 minutes of the fish feeding down the edge, I want to land as many fish as possible in that time. 3 fish, 4 fish, 5 fish in that time could go in excess of 50 pounds, and that's a lot of weight added to your total weight before the weigh-in. So let's talk about the rig. I've got 020 line, straight through, direct, no messing about. A nice big hook. I've got a 175 size 12 hook. That allows me to alternate between, let's say, double corn, 2 dendrobinas, bunches of maggots, and generally worm, corn and maggots are the only sensible baits you need to concentrate on when you're margin fishing. And also, the most important part is getting into the right depth. If you've got a spare platform next to you and you're allowed to fish up to that platform, fish in front of it, because that's where the carp are so used to feeding, because that's where the anglers put the bait. And it's also a lovely clean bottom as well. Next to the platform where I'm fishing, I've got just over 2 foot of water, which is perfect. I'd like it to be a little bit shallower, but I've got my float right next to the banking. There's less chance of the fish getting behind the float as a result of that. It's a Drennan 0.4 crystal dibber. Just the right weight as well, so it's taking 5 number 8s. And that's it, a really nice setup. One thing I haven't mentioned is the back shot. I always put loads of back shot on my float. Like I'm sure of you know now, it's so important when you're margin fishing. Minimise that float moving about, which reduces line bites and foul hook fish. You want to hook those fish in the mouth. If you foul hook them, the chances are you're going to lose a match winning fish. So spend a bit of time plumbing up, getting your rig right, getting everything right. When it comes to actually feeding, without doubt, ground bait is the most effective way of feeding your peg at the right time. Prior to that, it's a case of priming that line with particle baits. I like to use corn a lot, simply because it's nice and bright, it's very heavy, which allows me to feed by hand and feed next to the platform whilst I'm doing other things. I don't want to be feeding ground bait in the middle of the match when I know it's not the right time. I want to save my mix for the right time, and when the fish arrive, then I feed my ground bait. Ground bait is so effective for margin fishing simply because, especially on clear waters like this, it's not only food for the fish, but it's actually camouflage. It's colouring the lake up. It's making them feel even safe to move down and feed confidently. So remember that. Save your mix for the right time in the match to feed ground bait when the fish are actually there and they've arrived and they want some bait. So there you have it. 5 basic approaches on how to improve your weight and give you a really good chance of getting a big weight, and hopefully if you're in the match, in the mix match on the 29th of June, 5 approaches that will really help you, give you a mega chance of walking away with that fantastic prize of £10,000. So I hope it's all been of use to you, and I'll hopefully see you on the bankside very soon.